Today's daf is daf Lamed Beis Keminyan Lev, and we begin with Cheres, which is at the end of the third line from the top. Cheres Hadriani. So we'll soon see that this is a kind of an earthenware that's very, very special. It was some sort of very new initiative that was created by Hadrian, who, by the way, destroyed Beitar. But in any event, and it was a way in which he could create a piece of earthenware that could absorb so much wine and very sharp wine that the members of his military could take this earthenware, break it down into small pieces, and actually soak it in a way that the wine was absorbed in these shards and would come out. So my Hadriani, Omar Rav Yehuda Mishmul Cheres Shel Hadrianus Caesar. And now the Gemara is going to tell us how this was such a special earthenware. He he oh. He also of Dimi Omar Karka Besula Hoisa. He planted in a field Shalo Avda Odome Olam. It was land that had never been cultivated in the past, and therefore it could produce the best grapes on the planet. Avoda, Hadrian had his people cultivate the land, unita'ah, and he planted vineyards. And these vineyards had grapes that were very, very healthy, very strong, coming out of a karka basula that was very powerful. And he was able to take these grapes and make a very sharp wine out of it, very strong wine. V'rami lei lechamra begulfe chivare. Now, the word chivare means white, but in this context, it means new. And he was able to pour the wine into these new earthenware jugs. The jugs would absorb the wine with the passage of time, and that wine was now very, very high volume and sharp wine that was absorbed into the walls of this earthenware. And the military people would break this jug down into small shards, and they would carry it in their with all their equipment. Whenever they would arrive at a place and take a stop, so there was a station, and now they wanted to drink wine, is Taralahu. They would take the tough of Aramaic is a replace for the shin in Lashon Kodesh. So it's sharu. Sharu means shriya, means to soak it, and shasu. They would soak the shards of this Hadrian earthenware in water, and the very sharp and powerful taste of the wine would now be injected into the water. And when they drank the water, it was mamish like drinking wine. The Gemara is going to say it was on the highest level of wine, even though it was soaked in water. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi v'Rishon Shalanu. The highest quality wine that we produce here in Eretz Yisrael is Kishlishi Shalahem. It's like the third time they soak these shards. Once, twice, thrice. Iboilahu. Okay, now we get to the main issue in today's daf. And just to give it a name, this is called Rotze B'Kiyumo Al Yidei Dovar Acher. I mean, if we had a whiteboard, that's what we would write on the whiteboard. Iboilahu, Ma'u Lismoch Bahem Kari Amit. Okay, we said that you cannot, soak, put water into these shards of the Hadrian earthenware, because then you're going to get the yain from the goyim, yain nesech. But what if I want to use these shards for a different function, simply for the gufo, the physical material of the shards. And what would they do with these shards? In those days, the way beds were structured is that you had to put something under the legs of the bed on all four sides in order to hold the bed in place. So they wanted to use these shards from the Hadrianic earthenware and just benefit not from the wine, because they're not interested in the wine, but rather from the goof of these shards. And the Gemara says that depends on the following analytic question. In other words, he wants something to continue to exist, but not because of that, in this case, yayin, but simply because he needs the shards. So you're not allowed to benefit from yayin, and anytime you will to continue the existence, perpetuate the existence of the yayin nesach, that's prohibited. Because then you have a will to benefit from the yayin. But here, he's not benefiting from the yayin. It's almost coincidental that the yayin is absorbed within the walls of this utensil. Toshma, the Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yochanan, Chad Asar v'Chad Shari. So on this issue of Rotza B'Kiyuma Yidei Davracha, we have machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. Now here there's a girsa problem. According to one particular girsa, it says Hilchsa Kimandi Asar, meaning we paskin like that opinion. We don't know which of the two it is that said it was Asur, but Meisvei. So now, the word Meisvei, which means I'll raise an objection, only makes sense if you cross out the words V'hilchsa Kimandi Asar, because this Meisvei is going to support the opinion that it's Asur. So the word Meisvei, which means I'll raise an objection, is out of place. Now, we're going to discuss two types of utensils that the idolaters used to use, and whether or not we can use these utensils for our wine, to store our Jewish kosher wine, under the assumption that perhaps we'll be benefiting from the wine that's absorbed into the walls of these two categories of utensils. What are these two categories? There's dardurin and there's rukbaos. Now, rukbaos, if we go backwards for a minute, is something that's made of animal hides, or ayin vav resh. And they used to make what's called a node, which is a Hebrew word, and a node is a kind of a flask that's made of animal hides. And those same hides that were used for a flask could be converted into a saddle for a donkey. The other category here, hadardurin, that's already regular jars. And Yain Shal Yisrael Konospam, now he wants to store his wine, the Jew wants to store his wine in one of these two categories of utensils. And if he does so, Asur B'Shtia. So on the one hand, we're being machmir, we're saying that those kalim will be polate the tam of the yayin. So when you drink that wine that was stored in these kalim, now you're drinking the taste of yayin nesa. But on the other hand, it says mutar bano, which means that although yayin nesach itself is asur bano, you can't get any benefit from it. But here they weren't machmir to that extent because it's not the real McCoy wine of yayin nesach. It's just yayin nesach that was absorbed within these flasks. Now we're going to talk about Rav Gamliel. Rav Gamliel was the Gadol Adar, and we wanted to find out if Rav Gamliel would observe this chumrah, this prohibition, that's a result from the absorbed wine that now will penetrate into the Jewish wine, the absorbed wine of the guy. So Hayed Shimon ben Guda. Now Rab Gamliel, you have to understand, is already gone. His son is the Mamshich Haderech, and one of the Amoraim, or perhaps one of the Tanoim, by the name of Shimon ben Guda, stood in front of the son of Rab Gamliel and testified about his father, about Rab Gamliel, Sheshasa Mimenu B'Yakov, that Rab Gamliel was matir drinking the wine in the city of Akko that was stored in these jugs of the Goyim. V'lahodulo, the Chachamim said, no. Shimon, you're making a mistake. It's impossible that Rab Gamliel would have drunk wine from these flasks. However, you remember that we said there are two categories of receptacles. There's another category that's made a flask that's made of hides, and that's called nodos shel ovdei kocham. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer mishum Rav Shimon ben Kufusai also lasis mehem shtichim lechamor. We're not allowed to take these flasks, and instead of storing our wine in these flasks, we're going to rip open the flasks. They're made of hides, and we're going to use these hides as a saddle for a donkey. And the Rabbanan said you're not allowed to do that. So the Gemara right away says, what's his case? Of course, he wants the hides and this flask, but he doesn't want it for the purpose of the wine. He wants it for the purpose of a saddle for his donkey. So we see clearly that even though you're rotza b'kiyumo for another purpose, but not for the purpose of the wine, nevertheless it's prohibited. And that's exactly this case of the flasks that were made of hides of the idolaters. So it says, wait a minute, l'taimech, if you're going to go in a consistent way with your logic, then kankanim shel ovdei kocham litzuru lemizman. How do you buy jugs from idol worshippers, not for the sake of the wine that's absorbed within there, but for the sake of selling them? You're going to make a business out of it. And maishna nodos and maishna kankanim. If we're machmir in the case of nodos, even though it's rotza b'kiyuman alidei acher, he's not interested in these flasks of the idol worshippers for the wine that's the content of wine, but rather in order to use them for a saddle. So you see that rotza b'kiyuman alidei acher is asur. Then we should apply that same principle in the case of kankanim shel ovdei kocham, in the regular jars or jugs. Omar Rafa, Gzeira Shemi Baka Nodo, Vietlenu, Visperenu Al Gabi Nodo. It's really interesting. These flasks, these nodos that are made of hides, have multi-functions. You might decide that instead of using it as a flask, you want to use it to make a saddle for your donkey, but it still could be functioning in the capacity of a flask. And if you have another flask, and lo and behold, it rips, you need to patch it up, you'll take from the saddle of the donkey and patch it up. And then when your wine is in this flask, which has a patch from the flask of Ovdei Kochavim, you in effect are getting benefit from the wine. And the taste of the wine is now going to penetrate into your wine, into the wine in the flask. So it's not a case of rotza b'kiyuman alidei davar acher, but rather it's a gzeira atu. He'll use it as a flask, meaning as a patch for a flask. Now, obviously, that issue and that gzeira doesn't apply to the regular jugs of the idol worshippers. It only applies to these flasks that are made of hides, because they are used not only as saddles, but also to patch up another flask. So Gemara says, Isoli Surbiene. The Gemara now is establishing a distinction that even if I hold that Rotza B'Kiyuma Yedei Davar Acher is Asur, that only applies when there's real be'en mamosha stick of wine that's going to enter in to your wine. But in the normal classic jugs of the idol worshippers, the wine that's going to come out from the absorbed wine of Yayin Nesech is not an entity unto itself. It's not be'en. Masha Enkain, in contrast, with regard to the Hadrianic earthenware, there the wine that is so absorbed within it is be'en. And the proof is that you can make wine out of it by just simply soaking it in water. Now, we just finished saying that when the testimony came in from Shimon ben Guda regarding Rabbi Gamliel, that he drank from these flasks of the Ovdei Kochav, and the Gemara rejected and said, Lo hodulo. Reminu, I'll ask you a contradiction from a Vraisa. Yayin haba berukbaos shal Ovdei Kochav. Right, we said rukbaos are those flasks that are made out of animal hide. Also b'shtiyum mutabana. Hey, it's Shimon ben Guda l'fnei beno shel Rabbi Gamliel, al Rabbi Gamliel sheshasa ben Yaakov v'hodulo. The Vraisa says that they agreed with this testimony, which was transmitted to the effect that Rabbi Gamliel was matir and he allowed drinking from these flasks, and the Rabbanan accepted it. So the Gemara gives two answers. Number one, Milo hodulo dekomer hasam. What does it mean that in the first brisa that they didn't accept this testimony? That's called seyaso. Seyaso means the group of colleagues in front of which they said, well, Rabbi Gamliel was matir. Aval b'no module. Apparently, Rabbi Gamliel's son was privy to information because he saw his father's nihug and he saw that he was noe kula, and therefore he accepted it. Another answer. Ibois Amo, maybe there are two different people here, and that is Gudol Lechud v'Godel Lechud. Right? So don't tell me something about Shimon ben Guda in the second brisa, because the second brisa is authored by Shimon ben Godea. Two names that sound very similar. Now, we mentioned, and we have to repeat, that the idol worshippers would take a live animal and pierce through its heart, making a hole obviously in its body and removing the heart for the sake of the idol. And therefore, if you buy such an item and you see the hole is cut out there, a round hole, then you have to assume that this was what's called takroves ovdei kochav. It was used as part of the cult of the pagans. And that's called, in the language of the Mishnah, oros levuvim. Right? Levuvim is miloshen lev, like the daf that we're up to, lev. And this heart-shaped, pierced opening indicates that this was used in the sacrifice. We learned to the Brisa. Ezi or lavuv, kol shekarua keneged alev. You have to make sure that when you found that ripped off skin that opens up, that round hole, it was keneged alev. It was corresponding to the area of the lip. And therefore you suspect that it was taken out, the live, and this was part of Takroves Ak. V'kadur kimin aruba. They used to have round windows. Even today you'll see it in certain places, round windows. So the Gemara is saying that this hole that you found, and you suspect it's made for the purpose of idol worship, that has a round, it's like a round window. Now, does that mean it's automatically assumed to be used as takrovas akum? No, you have to have another condition. Yeshalav kurtov kuradam. If you see somewhere in this hole in the hide a very small amount of blood, which is called a kurt of dam, then also now we have clear-cut proof that this is not blood that came out after the animal was completely slaughtered and shechted, but rather that blood was there as a result of the piercing while the animal is alive. So let's just summarize three conditions that have to be fulfilled in order to generate an Isur and an assumption that it was used for Takrovas Akum. Number one, it's Keneged Alev. Number two, it's round like a round window. And number three, there's a kurt of dam. You find some sort of speck of blood over there.